Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
All right, welcome back to episode 286. Thanks for joining us again. This week we've got a great episode with Frater O. He's back. We're going to talk about ego. Fair disclaimer that this episode kind of flared up some heated feelings that I specifically had about certain gentlemen in the craft, wherever they may be dispersed, having these large, overinflated egos about things, dealing with titles, regardless. It was a good talk that I think we had, and I think we raised some really good points, specifically Frater O. So, in the news this week, we released the agenda for the 300 years of Freemasonry celebration that we are having on June 24th. So starting first thing in the morning on the 24th of June, we're going to have welcome and introduction. We'll have a brief history of the United Grand Lodge of England, which will be by Brother Mike Hambrick. We're going to have a great presentation about the Craftsman's Journey by Stephen L. Harrison, illustrious brother. We'll have a lunch, and I think we're going to have a couple options for lunch. It'll be a bring your own, buy your own, or we may have a catered option from Panera, which will be like a boxed lunch. After the lunch, we're going to have our first breakout session where we're going to pool some topics, split into groups, discuss our findings, and we'll do that for a couple hours actually, which will be really beneficial to a lot of gents. After that, we're going to do a Masonic trivia, various topics. We're going to split into teams. You'll be able to submit your answers via smartphone, so you'll just open up the website on your smartphone and you can go ahead and answer the questions right there from your smartphone on your teams, and you'll be able to win and possibly get some pretty amazing swag. So the prizes will be really cool. Then later toward the afternoon, we're going to do a live taping of the Masonic Roundtable, and we're going to take a topic suggestion from the floor, hopefully, and we'll do Q&A then also. It'll be a really cool episode, your time to get on the show actually, so it'll be really neat. Then after that, cocktails. That's right. We are going to have adult beverages will be available right there. We won't have to go anywhere else. And shortly after cocktail hour, we will have a festive board, and we will have Brother Mark Tabbert as our keynote speaker about George Washington. And in addition to that, we'll have some closing remarks by the Masonic Roundtable. And then the night is kind of over by 7, 8 o'clock. So what then? Well, Afterglow, cocktails, discussion, and fellowship on into the evening. So we really are going to have a great time. It's going to be one of the best Masonic experiences of my life, and I've been around, so I know you guys have too. I would hope that if you've been holding out, now's the time to go ahead and get your ticket, and you can do that by going to themasonicroundtable.com/300. If that's too much, just go to wcypodcast.com and click on the 300 years celebration. It'll take you right there where you can buy your ticket. These tickets are only going to be at this price point for another few days, and they are going to go up, so buy now, tell your friends. We are really looking forward to this event. So I think I went off the deep end a little nuts this last week. I attended a double fellowcraft degree, and something totally clicked in my head about something after another brother, Brother Steve, contacted me about some significance in a number that I had been looking at recently. And specifically, that number comes from a lecture in the Master Mason degree. These numbers have long stood out to me, and I thought there's got to be something with this, and Brother Steve brought it up, and I thought, oh, that's a neat correlation. And a day when I was sitting around in the double fellowcraft degree that was going on, I noticed those same numbers coming up. Now, these aren't numbers like 3 or anything like that, 5 or 7, nothing like that. Well, kind of like that, actually, but not what you'd expect. So I've been doing a little bit of research, and I think this will be another presentation topic that will be available on our website. I've already begun putting together the keynote for it, and it's a pretty good conversation starter, and we can see where we can actually go with it if we wanted to. Keep that in mind. And that presentation is currently called An Allusion to the Meaning of 15 Fellowcrafts and Other Masonic Usages. Sounds interesting for you, I hope. If you'd like to hear that presentation, feel free to shoot me an email, and we can maybe work out a time to do that presentation either at your lodge in person or over Skype or Google Hangouts, however you guys would like to do it. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get into this week's conversation with Frater O. All right, guys, we are back with Frater O. It's been a little spell. He's moved around the country a little bit, and we set aside some time to talk a little bit this evening about the topic of ego. And this kind of came up, and our green room conversations really started to blend into that topic almost seamlessly. And we were talking about when somebody recognizes our voice or our name in Lodge from the podcast, and we kind of thought, yeah, it's really weird and we don't really want the attention. And I think that might be directly attributed to this idea of not overinflating our egos. So I know, Frater O, you've had some experiences. Why don't you give our audience a little taste of what's happened and kind of how you've handled that?
Well, so we're just two fools, right? We're still here. We're not by any means enlightened masters or anything. We're fools in a human body trying to work on ourselves in the process and better ourselves. And as we better ourselves, better humanity. And the reason why I think a lot of us take like aliases or write pen names is to keep our ego in check, right? We don't. It's not for us. It's not about the fame. It's all about giving back. Robert started the show completely out of his own pocket because he wasn't getting the education he wanted, and that what's really the craft needed. Now it's evolved, and we love the show. We love our fans. We love the support. It's great to be recognized, but at the end of the day, we're fools. We're still in human bodies, working our way out, and do we have all the answers? Absolutely not. We're on this journey, and we're digging deep, and we try to bubble up what we find and give it back to humanity, and allow that information to progress and possibly allow more deeper discussions among the crowd.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that's happened is when I'll go out to a lodge just in the area, or perhaps I might go to another jurisdiction, and somebody will say, "Oh, I listened to your show. That's so amazing." And for me, it's always really weird. A lot of times I think people might think I'm being a jerk. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just literally, I think I'm still shell-shocked and really humbled by the fact that anybody would say, I listen to you all the time. In fact, a lot of people say to me, "I listen to your show all the time." And I say, "I'm sorry." I joke about it because I don't know how to really accept the fact that, this is in the realm of something that you listen to every morning, the voice on your commute. And I've always felt really humble about what myself and the team does. Brother Jason Richards, worshipful brother Jason Richards, had alluded to the fact that egos are so overinflated in Masonry that it really is interesting to see just how much people allow their titles and their color of the hat they wear to inflate that ego. What you do find, I think, Frater O might be able to confirm this, is no matter how amazing of a Mason you are, how active you are, your reputation, there seems to be a couple types of Masons where these egos really get overinflated, and that's when people kind of get turned off. But then there are also some really amazing Masons who are, we'll just talk about the elephant in the room here, white hats and purple hats that do the actual work. And I could sit down and have a conversation and go, "Holy cow, man, you are really in it. Like, this is great." But there are other 33rd degree Masons that I've met that hold the position that they are Freemasonry. Because they have that degree, they know everything there is to know. And that's the end of the story. And I think that kind of ego is bad news.
Yeah, ego is a tricky thing and a topic to get into. And, just kind of sidetracking and sidestepping, Masonry and ego. I mean, when you really get down to the juxt of the actual degrees, it's the science of really the ideology of enlightenment as well as defeating the ego. That's what Masonry, when you get down to it, there's a battle going on, and that battle is going on in the playing field of your mind. It's So right now, while you're listening to this podcast, this exists in your mind. Everything externally of you, your whole experience, is in your mind, through your body, through the meat suit, through the vehicle, and through the observer. And so, if you read any of Jung and you get into like alchemy, he gets into the ego, the superego, and the subconscious. RJ, do you want to kind of like touch on the parts of like the superego, ego conscious?
Yeah, sure. Where Frater O is referring to the subconscious, we would call that the ID. You have the ego, and you have the superego. And in a nutshell, these are elements of psychology that are used to explain our behaviors, our choices. They deal with, for instance, a young, like a baby, only has the id, the subconscious. It has a survival mechanism. It knows to cry when it wants something only. As you grow older, we'll say up to maybe 13, 14 years old, you have, the argument is that you have an id, you have a want for something, and you also have a super ego. And that super ego is very small at this point because it's really based on, I should preface this by saying, so the id is wants, the ego is you want something and you know whether it's right or wrong, and the superego is when you know something and you do the right thing because it's right. It's more of the altruistic side. As a child, right, you have this, just the id, you want something, and then you have the superego, which is like the age of reason, so you start making conscious choices based on, whether or not you're going to get in trouble for these things. So this is your super ego. You get your super ego as a little bit of your values, your family values, your religion, these kind of things from your parents. They inflect these things upon you. You know what's right and wrong because they've told you what's right and wrong. So you have a flavor for the super ego. You actually don't develop an ego until about the age of 15. The ego is this thing that says, we'll use the anecdote of Frater O wants a chocolate bar. And if he's going with his id and he's in a store, he's going there. Let's say there's one chocolate bar left on the shelf, and Frater O's just gonna steal it. He steals the chocolate bar. He listened to his id. Let's say there's just that one chocolate bar left, and if he wants to use his super ego, we're gonna skip over the ego for a second. He wants to use a super ego, and there's one left. Frater O doesn't steal it. He buys it and gives it to somebody who needs it. And then you have the ego, which is a lot of times the equilibrium between the two. So if the id is the material and the superego, or the id is the subconscious, so you have this material, and then you have this higher consciousness saying, this moral altruistic way to be. They meet in the middle and they form this, they form the ego. So they give you a more informed decision. It's more of your mind's ability to look at both sides and come up with a compromise that is acceptable. But it's based on social acceptable things. So the moral version would be Frater O decides to buy the candy bar for himself. There's a lot that goes into this. And what we have, this is the psychological definition of the subconscious id, ego, and superego. But as it relates into Freemasonry, we see this all the time with, to use the term, this guy's got a huge ego, is a little bit of a weird catch-all because it doesn't really imply what textbook definition of having a large ego would be. To have a large ego, textbook style, I think would probably maintain something along the idea of this guy's had to make some huge choices in his life and usually really listens to both sides. So he's got a wide variety of things he's decided upon in his life that have gone well. However, the way we term the use, it's almost a secondary thing. So what we're talking about is to make somebody or to be somebody who is so almost intellectually vain about themselves that it's a detriment not only to themselves, but to the people around. We've witnessed this, and I'm sure everybody listening knows somebody who knows somebody. We call him a Tony Topper. He's always got a better story than you. They'll start a lot of sentences with oh, that's nothing, this one time. Or, it's always about them. There's just not a whole lot of, let me tell you about you. Or it's always a lot of me stuff.
Eyes and me's.
Eyes and me's, yeah. Like, there are people that will write elements for the Midnight Freemasons. We get a lot of guest posts, right? And I have to sort through a lot of these things. And there is this example that I'll give is that just an open suggestion, and I've never said this before, but here's an open suggestion for anybody who is looking to be a guest contributor. Please don't write about what you've done. That's not cool. And if you have to write about what you've done, maybe mask it a little bit. Say, we've done something. We've done this. Because I don't think you need to write about your accomplishments and ask somebody to publish them. That's an ego problem, right? Like, we don't want to feed a big ego because it's ridiculous. And I'm never going to publish those pieces. So I'm sorry that you're hearing about it this way. I've probably got about 60 or so pieces sitting on my Google Drive that you guys have all sent in, and some of them I go through, I read them, and I'm going to publish them. I mark them for further editing, and some of them I just delete. I might not ever send you like a thanks but no thanks, but that's just kind of the way it is. I have a lot on my plate, but see how I did that? I have a lot on my plate, like I'm special.
But the ego is the ultimate trickster, right? It pretends. So a lot of times, in early stages of development, the ego and the superego, you don't know which voice is which. And the ego does a really good job, hiding directly in plain sight and making it think it's you. And it's a very crafty battle that it creates inside of your mind. And there's many different ways on how you can shred that or learn to develop between hearing what the two of them are. We've talked in the past about psychedelics, but personally, we do not condone them. Freemasonry does not condone them by any means. I've never partaken in any of them, but to really shred the ego fast, that's a really good avenue. It's been written about extensively on how your whole time you've been acting in ego and you've never known what ego was. But then there's your second route, which is more of the traditional form of learning to get into transcendental meditation or yoga or tai chi or whirling dervishes or rhythmic drumming, holotropic breath work, that allows you to really quiet the ego and quiet the mind and understand what the difference is between who you are and who this trickster is, this ultimate trickster, this ego, this character that makes you think that who you are, but really who you're not. This might sound funny for a lot of new Masons, and this might be a whole new territory. And if you really get down to the science of like the first 3 degrees, it really gets into the meat and potatoes of learning how live above that ego, learn how to understand what the ego is.
Yeah, I think what you've hit on there is really interesting. We talk about that trickster. We've got a couple issues I think to talk through. One is that I want to say maybe like year 2 of this show, we read a paper and it was the real something of Freemasonry, but essentially what it was there was like a gift being made, somebody was being taken care of, and at the end of the piece it was like Freemasonry is not giving, it's essentially giving without anybody knowing who's giving it. And we do a lot of this in Freemasonry in that we love to say what we did. We donated X amount of dollars to XYZ. We did this. We did this. We did this. Put it in the paper because somebody's got to know about this. Nobody cares. That's just feeding the ego of Masonry. And I get that some of this is this is us going out there and saying, look what we do. You should join. And I think we got lost there somewhere along the way. We got a lot of people who need to be recognized in order for them to work. And that's a shame. Masons I know in my own lodge have been really tremendous in that they'll have no idea and we'll recognize them for something, and as a secretary, I get the stink eye. They're like, I wasn't looking for this, and I don't really want to be up here accepting some award. And it's like, I know, but you should at least know that your brothers who know what you do, and you do it anonymously. And that's awesome. So thanks. That's the last we ever hear of it. But think about that. If we didn't have egos in the fraternity, would there be 33rd degree Masons? Would there be degrees that kept going higher in a numbered system? The whole idea is there's always like this myth of the unknown superiors. There could never be unknown superiors because they'd have such an ego. They'd tell somebody and we would know who they were. It's really bizarre. And I'm not sure, and by no means am I free of an ego, right? I talked about it this evening. I'm a really busy guy. And just by saying that, I'm admitting there's some ego there, right? Like I produce a few podcasts. I do Midnight Freemasons. I do this. I do that. But nobody really cares, because guess what? If you feed this idea of ego, it doesn't go well when that person finally realizes that when they pull their hands out of the bucket of water, your hands don't leave a negative space in the water, right? Somebody else picks that stuff right back up. You're not doing anything by leaving the organization. And there's an ego there that says, oh, they'll see when I leave, it's going to be really hard. Yeah, it's going to be hard for 5 minutes until the next guy picks up the tools. That's another ego problem we have.
Yeah, there's always egos in any organization, regardless if it's personal or business or family. The ego is a very tricky thing. It's an interesting journey when you learn to understand yourself and the journey of knowing thyself and getting the deeper aspects of learning out who you are as an individual. And when you take a hard look at yourself, and I'm not saying look at yourself in the mirror, but I mean really get into it. So when you get to deeper aspects of learning who you are, and you're shredding, layers upon layers of emotional trauma and things you've been holding on to for years and in the past, you can really get down to finding out what the ego is and how the ego operates. And it takes time, it takes hard work, and it takes consistency to get to these levels of the past subconscious and get to what the ego is and the trickster. And then, that trickster, that ego, is that voice that's there, that's inside of your head, that tells you about the eyes and the knees. But then it's also can be self-sabotaging as well. It's the voice inside of your head that screams out a million times when you're trying to take on something difficult and tells you no, tells you you can't, tells you it's hard, it's too difficult. It'll do everything possible to defeat you in your tracks, or whatever it may be, to get outside of your comfort zone or establish something in your life. And learning to control that, and learning how to control the ego, which you touched on briefly, is the ego is attached to the emotions. And the ego will allow, or actually will trigger the emotions to be used, so to speak, against you if you're trying to accomplish things. And emotions are really tricky things, especially when you're trying to get to know yourself and learning to control yourself with these emotions and this ultimate trickster. And it's fascinating when you really take a hard look at the first degree, and you step back and you see the working tools that are presented and the simple fundamental teachings that are presented, right? And you look at those, and it has to do a lot about passions and about actions. And once you realize the effect that has on yourself, and you start applying those working tools internally, you see a unique change on a psychological level. Your brother Cliff Porter gets into this extensively in his Secret Psychology of Freemasonry books. Wonderfully done, written from a criminal background and law enforcement and investigation and private investigation and being a detective. He gets really into the subconscious mind and the ego and understanding what the ego does and the scripts that it can. But it's interesting too is when you start studying the Kabbalah and the Sephiroth system, or if you start studying any of Solomon magic or chaos magic, it gets into the archetypal figures that the ego can play at a moment's notice. Like, ultimately, break it down simply, and even Jung gets into it. It's 12 different characteristics that you can play into, and that the ego can trigger you emotionally, where you can actually emotionally represent or actually run from. So it's an interesting journey when you want to get into the deeper aspects of the ego, understanding what the ego is and how to defeat that, or live above the ego, or understand the games the ego plays that could sometimes not work in your favor.
What you've touched on there, you talked a little bit about living above, right? And to that end, we've talked about you should always strive to live in what I would describe as the superego. A Mason's job should be to live in the superego. It should be to live in a space where you're doing things because it's the right thing to do, not because anything else. So some examples of this, this is a really hard concept for a lot of people to understand, is that because they'll go, well, where does it stop? Where does it stop? Where does it stop? And it doesn't. So, and what I mean by this is, if we were actually altruistic, if we were always living in the superego, we would actually never do anything. You hear a lot of people say, and man, it drives me kind of up a wall a little bit, because we've moved on to one stage of human evolution in which there's a lot of people thinking, I like to do things for charity, and I like to do this, and I like to pay it forward, and I like to do this, and I'll pay for the guy behind me at Starbucks, whatever it is, right? And I'll say, well, why do you do that stuff? And they go, well, because it makes me feel good. Well, that's selfish. That's it. And that bogs a lot of people down. Like, well, no, it's not. It makes me feel good to do these things. Well, so either A, you really don't care how it makes you feel, and you're just saying that it makes you feel good. I can believe that. And in those cases, what you're doing is altruistic. But if you literally do things because it makes you feel like a better human being, I have to ask what do you do that's so horrible that you need to make yourself feel better? And then also the idea that anything you're naturally doing, if you're doing anything to make yourself feel better, that is a selfish act by definition. So I'm not saying that people who do these things or say that they make them feel better, I'm not saying that you have a problem or you're being selfish. I'm saying we need to look deeper at it, because it's not just you're making yourself feel better. There's something else there. And I don't have the answer for it, but to live always in the superego is really the goal. And I don't know, as a human society, if that's ever even possible. I was discussing this with my wife maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and she said, well, do you think humans could ever be just altruistic and completely only doing things because it's the right thing to do? And I didn't really have an answer. And so I almost thought about it as like this. If everybody was just altruistic and that's it, where's the flavor? And are we just at that point zombies? So is there a delicate balance between having some ego and no ego? And I think the Masonic degree system, as you point out in that first degree, should lay the cornerstone for letting us start to make that equilibrium and to look at it a certain way. And hopefully, right, by the time we are Master Masons, the ego is dead, or the negative aspects of our ego are dead or dying. And this is why I find it so perplexing that in a system like Freemasonry, where we pride ourselves on what we do so much, we can't stop talking about what we do. And this is the opposite, I think, of what our whole mission should be. There's a lot of men, like I said, at the top of every organization who don't really have huge egos and the way we're talking about them. But there are a lot of guys who do. And I almost wonder, did they just miss those first 3 degrees altogether? Because it just doesn't seem like they get it, or they lived it, or they put those ideas into practice, or maybe it's just lost. Maybe they don't see that it's not a deeper meaning. It's deeper in the sense that it's not right on the surface, but it's not so deep like Manly P. Hall 7 layers deep, right? It's just the next level down. This is an ego death.
Mm-hmm. Of course. And that's what the 3rd degree really is emblematic of, without a doubt. And, everything we've talked on, I just really want to issue a charge to all the Masons that are listening, or even if you're not a Mason and you're listening, it's just be conscious of the eyes that you speak of. Ultimately, let your actions speak louder than your words. That's it. Because all we have to do at the end of the day, or all we can really be judged by, is not our words, but our action.
Yeah, my kids all the time, I call it the grown-up Santa Claus thing, right? I mean, it's like, I asked my kids 3 years ago when they really started to be conscious about what I'm asking them, right? Why are we good for Santa Claus? Yes, I'm a deist and we do Christmas. It's okay. But I say, why are we good for Santa Claus? Or why are we good all year, and why does it matter, right? And my sons all kind of said, well, right, so we get presents. Wrong. Like, this is the problem. We shouldn't be good to get presents. We should be good because it's the right thing to do. Famous scene from Real Detectives, Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, and I think the guy says something along the lines of, in this particular scene, he's talking about really super heavy sect of Christianity, that they were investigating a crime. And he said something along the lines of, if your sole motivation for being a good person is so that you have a great afterlife, you're a piece of shit. And I think that's true for everything. We really should look at that. We should be good people, no matter what. And the ego, the way it ties into being a good person is that we don't always need to be called out for every little thing we do. We don't always need to be calling attention to ourselves. And like Frater O said, he nailed it. Let your actions speak louder than your words. My brother-in-law, we were at the Field Museum this weekend in Chicago, and my kids were packing up some bags, and they were like, they were just chatting, And I said, hey, there's a lot of talking going on, not a lot of work going on. And he had to laugh, right? And it's the same thing. Talk is cheap. Don't just talk the talk. You got to walk the walk. And we all fall off the wagon every once in a while, I'm sure. But that charge that Frater O just gave us, I think that's pinnacle of what a Mason should do day in and day out. You're not just a Mason in Lodge. You should be a Mason 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, now until the day you take your last breath. You have a responsibility to just be a good person. I'm sure we all know somebody who we say something along the lines of, it's your world, we're just living in it. We don't want to be that guy, right? So let's just not be that guy.
Well said. Brother John Ruark said something to me very recently and really hit home. And he said he had a really profound quote that he found on Reddit. And he's like, the quote goes, I'm paraphrasing, John, I'm sorry. And the quote goes along the lines of, every single thought and every single action that you have had to this point right now has put you in this exact situation. So think about that. Now, if you're able to change that and you're aware that every thought and every action, and we've kind of clearly defined of what the ego and the superego is and the subconscious, and if you're able to control that, anything's possible. You realize you're your own worst enemy.
There you go.
I don't know what else to say.
Well, I think we can end it right there then.
Oh, yeah. I also just want to add a closing note and this to thank you to all the brothers that I have met in my journey here in D.C. and in Virginia and Maryland. It's been a big fraternal welcome down here. So thank you. Thank you so much for those who have recognized me and recognized the voice and all the fraternal love that I've received. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Frater. We'll talk to you very soon, brother. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right, that's it for this week. I hope you guys all enjoyed. If you like this program, please feel free to check out the Masonic Roundtable. That goes live on Tuesday nights at 10/9 Central. We've got some great topics coming up. Please don't forget about 300 years of Freemasonry, our celebration, Freemasonry's legacy, Freemasonry's future. Again, June 23rd, Friday, early arrivals into registration. And June 24th, Saturday, the George Washington Masonic National Memorial is where we are hosting this event. It's going to be amazing. Got a little bit of a Q&A up there right now, so will there be hotels to stay at a discounted rate? You bet. So check right back on the website for details as that emerges. Will there be vendors for me to spend lots of cash on? You bet. Vendors list will be forthcoming. If you'd like a table, please contact the Masonic Roundtable at gmail.com. Can I bring my friend, wife, spouse, partner? Since this will not be a tiled event, it is open to friends and guests of the fraternity. However, there will not be other programs running for them, and all guests must have a ticket. So keep that in mind. Please consider supporting this show and becoming a producer. You can do that by visiting wcypodcast.com and click on the Support the Show link. Underneath that, you'll see links for buying our pin, which is really exclusive item just for you. Nobody else makes it. It's only available here, and it is not a design anybody else has. It's just ours, so it's really cool there. You can click the Where to Shop button, and you will be taken to listing of great places to do some shopping, including King Solomon's Reserve beard oil, available through buybankersbest.com. They've also got a beard balm now as well. And if you do buy anything from buybankersbest.com, please use the promo code BBWCY357 and you'll get 20% off. It's a pretty rad deal. If you click through our links to go to Onnit and you get yourself some Alpha Brain or some other things, please make sure that you use the promo code WCY and you'll get 10% off. And if none of that strikes your fancy, you can also just donate via PayPal. And again, all donations go right back into this show. We really appreciate all of the assistance we've already got. A friendly reminder, this is listener-supported education. So without you, this doesn't happen. You guys are the producers of the program, and I just really appreciate being able to come back here week after week and put some content together for you guys. I love it, and I love you guys. Thanks so much. Let me go ahead and mention the Midnight Freemasons. We publish 3 articles every single week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This last week, we had a great piece by Brother Todd E. Creason, so please feel free to check that out. And that's it, guys. So until next week, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.